And so in order to really pursue this issue accurately, I believe we have to ask two questions. The first is, what is the fetus? And the second is, what is the unborn? Because ultimately, I agree with Matt. This is the problem with having someone else running your PDF. I agree with Matt on everything that he has just said. I think that we should trust women. I think that we should respect the right to privacy. I think that we shouldn't be forcing women to have dangerous surgery if we make abortion illegal. I think that all these things are absolutely accurate and true, and that abortion should be safe and it should be legal, and all these things are a fact if the preborn are not human beings. Because ultimately it does boil down to that. If abortion does not kill a human being, then no justification for abortion is necessary. But if abortion does kill a human being, then no justification for abortion is adequate. Turning to biology, we see that the law of biogenesis, the principle of biogenesis, says that every creature reproduces after its own kind. So life comes from life. And because all living things reproduce after their own kind, from a biological standpoint, what is inside the uterus, because it came from two human beings, cannot be anything else than a human being. We also know from science, we basically look at what the embryo is based on cell composition and cell behavior. When we look at an embryo, for instance, as compared to sperm or ovum, we see that the embryo is comprised of 46 chromosomes, sperm and ovum and other skin cells sperm and ovum are composed of 23 chromosomes each. They're differentiated cells, just the same way as someone says, well, if you scratch your arm, aren't you committing genocide? No, you're not, because those are differentiated cells. They are different kinds of cells. Second of all, we look at cell behavior. We look at an embryo, and even at a single cell, the embryo is different from sperm and ovum because the sperm and ovum each have their own function. The sperm's function is to go search for the ovum's function is to be hospitable to the sperm. Once the two of them have merged, you have a new entity that has a completely new function. That function with its inherent code is to develop itself through all stages of human development. Go ahead. So we know that from science we can see the embryo is alive, life comes from life. It has human parents, so it's a human. Human DNA determining its code right from the beginning of fertilization, whether it's going to be male, female, what particular personality traits it might have. And we also know that the embryo is whole, unlike sperm and egg, which are parts of human beings. So we can't say that it's a potential human. It's not a potential human. It's a human with great potential. I just want to quickly look at science. I'm going to skip through these really quickly because I think we're... oh, my stopwatch didn't start. Okay, you'll have to tell me how my time is doing. My stopwatch didn't start. This is a highly specialized totipotent cell marked the beginning of each of us as a unique individual. Zygote formed by the union of oocyte and sperm is the beginning of new human life. You can go ahead and run through these really quickly. Just skip ahead. Just skip through them. Okay, go back. So obviously science has said that human life begins at fertilization. This is not something that pro-lifers are inventing. This is not propaganda. This is already biologically determined. But then you say, well, hold on a second. There are significant differences between a fertilized embryo and a born person. And I would actually agree with you. However, there are significant differences between a born person and an adult. So between the fertilized embryo and birth, they're different in size, obviously, different level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. However, when you look at it, all of these differences are also the same differences that exist between a born person and an adult. Is it skipping? There we go. So as we will change in size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency from fertilization to birth, we will also do the same from birth to adulthood. So size, yes, a fetus is much smaller than a born person. But then again, an infant or a toddler is much smaller than a woman, who is much, often smaller than a man. But we don't say that our value is determined based on our size. So value is not determined for any of us past the birth marker. Why should that be determined? Why should size be the marker before birth? Level of development. Yes, of course, a fetus is extremely less developed. Matt raised a few points on consciousness and brain. So level of development, yes, they're a lot less developed. But then again, a toddler is much less developed than a teenager, and we don't say that because they're less developed, they're less valuable. Same thing can be said with environment. We change locations all throughout our life, but where we are doesn't make who or what we are. And finally, degree of dependency. Yes, a fetus is much more dependent than any of us, but that degree of dependency will change over the course of our lives. Sometimes we'll become more dependent or less dependent over the course of our lifetime. Dependency is not what makes us valuable. Go ahead. It really boils down to one thing: our common humanity. And so, yeah, Matt is correct that we can talk about rights being in conflict, and we could talk about how labeling pregnant women is unfair, labeling pregnant women as parents is unfair, and that making a comparison and asking, are we equal, is unfair if we're talking about a fetus. And he's right, if the preborn are not human beings. Because if they are human beings, then yeah, you are a parent, even when it's prenatal. And yeah, you do have basic obligations to that child, even when that child is living inside you. And yeah, if that fetus is a human being, then that is their uterus, that is their home, that is their environment. Nature has ultimately designed us from an evolutionary standpoint that that's the only way that our species can live. And so at that age and stage of development, a fetus is in his or her rightful environment. That's where she's supposed to grow, that's where she's supposed to be. Yes, so there's rights and conflict. And ultimately, that right is autonomy for 9 months versus the life of the fetus forever. And parents do have basic obligations to their children. They have an obligation not to do extraordinary things like take them to Disney World, but they do have an obligation to feed and to shelter them. And so if that fetus is their child, their human being, prenatally, then they've got a basic obligation to shelter and to feed them prenatally.